Hello Internet, welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie and in today's video we are building a habitat for the ever charismatic giant panda. So for those of you that watched my last video about building a habitat for the American bison and the pronghorned antelope, you may remember me saying that the next video was going to be about the alpine ibex. And whilst I have built their habitat, I decided that today's video would actually be about the giant panda because there was a community challenge going on at the moment, so it's a perfect opportunity for me to put them in our zoo. They were always planned for the temperate hills, so this community challenge just meant that I should do it a little bit sooner. So this video, I'm going to be building a wonderful habitat for these giant pandas. And the first thing that I'm doing is I'm using some stone brick pieces to make an outline of our habitat. I want the rear part of this habitat to be built into the hills. There's quite a lot of raised ground at the back. I'm going to have the walls kind of disappear into that, and I'll lay a null barrier back there to ensure that it does register as the edge of the habitat. But right here at the front, I'm going to be using a 1 meter tall piece of block wall, and I'm going to run that around the path that we already have in place, and this will serve as our viewing gallery. By keeping this bottom wall quite low, we can then have some glass in the middle and replicate what we're doing on the ground above it to create a window frame. For the sides of the habitat, however, where we don't want there to be a viewing gallery, we are just going to use the 4 meter tall pieces of brick wall, and we're just going to kind of just continue this outline. We're not going to worry too much about having a nice curvature to the edges because we're not running alongside a path. It's going to be disappearing into the background, so we don't need it to look that pretty. Once the general outline of this habitat was complete, I thought I might spice up our habitat barrier a little bit by adding this brick wall rampart to the top part of the viewing gallery, just to add a little bit more flavour and separate it a little bit from other habitats that we have in the zoo. All I'm going to do is run this along the perimeter of the habitat. To begin with, I only put it on the viewing gallery area, but later on I decide to actually run it along the edge pieces as well, just to keep it a little bit more uniform and a bit more cohesive looking. With the rampart topper on, I decide to place our glass barriers. I'm going to be using one-way glass, and this is just to ensure that our animals feel like they've got a bit of privacy and they won't get too stressed out by guests coming right up to the viewing gallery and looking in the enclosure, because the animals aren't going to be able to tell. This is an excellent way to decrease animal stress if that is a problem in your zoo, and you have the ability to add glass to your habitat barriers. Using one-way glass always limits the amount of stress that animals feel, so keep that in mind when you're building your habitats. Now, in order to make sure the animals can't just climb over the wall or the slopes to the edges of the habitats, I need to make the ground just that little bit higher. I need it to be steeper so the animals can't climb out. All I'm going to do is use the cube terrain stamp tool and just increase the volume of earth at the back. Make sure it's nice, like kind of a cliff face kind of looking thing, so the animals can't climb that. It is very untidy at this stage. It looks horrible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the basic amount of earth that I want to add in place by using this terrain stamper tool, and then I'll come back using a roughen tool to make the area look a little bit more organic, and then I'm going to use a smooth tool just to make it look a little less chaotic. It's important to use both these things. If you just smooth it, you are still going to see the cube-like shapes. It's still going to very much appear as a man-made thing. But if you use the roughen tool first, it makes it look more organic, it makes it look more natural, and then you can round it off a little bit, and it won't resemble the cubes that you put in place to begin with. Now that the rear terrain portions are in place and it's going to make sure animals can't escape, it's time to run the null barrier around the habitat. I'm going to join it up to the glass barriers at the front and then just run it through the walls that we created and kind of through the mountains as well at the back. Not really making sure that it connects to anything back there. We just want to make sure it goes further than the animals would be able to travel, because if the animals can travel as far as the null barrier, then it's going to keep giving you alerts to the animals have escaped, so that's just something you want to bear in mind. For this habitat house, I want it to be quite themed, so I'm going to be using building pieces only from the East Asia building theme, and I'm going to primarily be using these stone brick walls to create kind of an outline of our building. And I had the idea of having the bottom tier, because it's going to be a multi-tiered building, I had the idea of having the bottom tier be a dual tone. So we're going to use this stone brick wall on the upper half, and then on the bottom half we are going to use a different type of wall, a slightly darker one, something that's going to contrast against this quite nicely, and that's going to be the dry stone walls. We're going to make sure that both these pieces are 2 meters tall, because then that will make up a 4-meter piece, which means it will fit with the rest of the building rather nicely. Now when you first do it, it does look a bit ugly, and that's because it hasn't really been blended in, and that's completely fine. As we go, we're going to add bits of timber and stuff on the corners to help break it up, and that will just make it look a lot more natural, like it was intentional. This does look a bit too slapped together. Adding details and decorations to these kind of buildings can really help to bring the whole look together. And there's quite a bit of experimentation in terms of the roofing pieces and whatnot, and trying to figure out how to make a multi-tiered building. But with a little bit of playing about, I think I arrive at something that I'm quite happy with, and this will make a lovely little house for our pandas. If you're interested, this building will be available in the PlayStation, or not PlayStation specifically, the console version of the Planet Zoo workshop. So unfortunately for playing on PC you won't be able to get this building, but for those of you on console, this building is now available in the workshop for you to add to your own zoos. Back over the main habitat, we're having some wonderful English weather and it is completely pouring with rain. But that's not going to stop us. So what we're going to do here is create a raised viewing gallery off to the side of the habitat, and we're going to be using the bamboo path because I think that's pretty fitting for giant pandas. Now I'm going to get it to a height that I want it to be at, and then I'm going to use the align to grid tool in order to make a nice uniform shaped kind of floating platform for this viewing gallery to be on. It's just going to be an oblong shape, and then I'm going to use some East Asia themed building pieces to create a kind of canopy that can hang above this to ensure that if guests go up here there's a little bit of shelter. I don't know why I care for this part. I mean, the rest of the zoo you're just going to get soaked, you need to have an umbrella, but up here sure you can stay dry. I'm going to prop it up using a couple columns, add some benches and bins, education boards, and even an education talk point so that we can host some talks about the giant pandas up here as well. With the arrival of our pandas in the habitat, we can see using the heat maps where the animals can escape from their habitat, and unfortunately they can escape on the rear left portion of the habitat. So to remedy this, rather than altering the terrain anymore, I'm going to litter this area with lots of large rocks. Now, to begin with, it doesn't look great. In fact, for most of it, it looks really ugly. But once I start to add smaller rocks near the bottom, it starts to suggest that this is kind of a area that has been subject to a landslide. There's been a collapse of some kind, and loads of rocks and rubble have been littered everywhere. If you make sure there's a variety in sizes, it really helps to sell this idea that it's a much more natural looking thing than just a wall made of rocks, which unfortunately it does look like to begin with. Especially when you start to add trees and stuff to this area, I'm going to make sure to add some broken trees and tree stumps and a kind of not that much life back here, except for some trees that survived and a lot of dead kind of plant life. It really helps to kind of tell the story that I came up with of the idea of it being a landslide area, almost as if though we are living at the bottom of a mountain, and that's kind of appropriate for these animals. They live in mountains primarily now because of habitat loss and poaching. They've been driven out of the lowlands, which is where they normally live, so they have been driven up into mountains, which makes this kind of thematic, I guess. So yeah, we're going to get into plant life now and placing that everywhere. I'll whack it in time lapse for you. I'm not going to talk too much about it. It's just there's quite a nice variety of trees and colours in this one, and there's not too much in the way of ground covering. Instead, we've got some more focal points in terms of colourful bushes and trees. Back outside of the habitat, I decided to add a bunch of ivy to the walls. I really like this idea of having some of the foliage growing over the wall and obscuring part of the viewing gallery a little bit and just making it seem a little bit lost in nature as well. I'm making sure to use a few different lengths of ivy, spacing out a little bit just to create that variety, as that is how you sell the idea of nature. It doesn't really look like much. It's a really simple thing to do. It doesn't look like it takes much effort, and it doesn't, but once it is done, it really does have quite a nice effect, and it makes this area a whole lot more immersive. And one thing that I did decide to do once I'd added a bunch of this hanging stuff is to use some of the stuff coming out of the ground as well to creep up behind the information signs, just to help drive this idea that this is being lost in nature. At this point, I realised I'd made a grave mistake, at least for me, and that was that I hadn't added any rocks or boulders to the edge of our water source. I love having an actual water source surrounded by stones. It just helps to make it look a lot more natural and organic. So, after adding a few rocks to the edges of the watering hole, this habitat was done. Thank you so much for having watched this video. If you liked it, consider giving it a thumbs up and maybe subscribing to the channel to see more videos just like this appearing in your subscription feed. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.